Understanding, saying that Catholics who have civil divorces and remarry should not be shunned by the Church. There were some red lines that were impossible for Francis to cross. He always remained unmoving on the Catholic Church's complete opposition to contraception and abortion.
Be sanctities of respect for life, proclaiming the sacredness of every human life from conception to natural death.
He also reaffirmed the Church's opposition to in vitro fertilization and called for a global ban on surrogate pregnancy.
A child is always a gift and never the object of a commercial contract.
Francis may not have been the sweeping reformer that progressive believers had hoped for, but the late Pope changed the tone of the Vatican. He helped people who once believed the Catholic Church had no place for them to feel more welcome. And he pushed the institution to live up to the meaning of its name, the Universal Church.
We're also getting some reaction coming in from the Dutch Prime Minister saying the global Catholic community bids farewell to a leader who recognised the burning issues of our day and called attention to them with his sober way of life, acts of service and compassion. Pope Francis was a role model for many Catholics and non-Catholics alike. That coming in to us from the Dutch Prime Minister. Well, Kedevan Gorgistani is still with me here on set. Kedevan, that reaction starting to come in, but international leaders are going to be lining up, if that's the right way, to give their reactions and to offer some support to the Vatican and to the faithful at this difficult time.
Yes, because this is something that sort of bridges over the religious and the political, because of course he was the leader of the Catholic Church, but also a world leader, and so you're going to have those world leaders expressing their condolences to someone that some of them have probably met, that they worked with on several different issues. That was someone who wasn't only speaking to the Catholics of the world, but sort of also gave his vision of what the world would be. And recently, there was something that he cared about. Of course, we've talked about earlier this focus on the plight of migrants around the world, on the plight of minorities and how they're treated around the world. And there was something that he warned against, which was the rise of the far right, the rise of populism. He actually did that a little bit ahead of the French parliamentary elections last year without, again, naming names. But he was saying that there was a danger of ideological temptations and of populists around the world. And he said that democracy around the world was also something that was being threatened. And so you saw this Pope who very regularly stepped out of just the religious to sort of give guidance to the world, whether the people are actual believers or not.
Stay with us, Kedevan. We're also getting some reaction just coming in to us from the EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen, hailing the Pope's humility and love, so pure for the less fortunate. Well, let's bring in now Massimo Fangioli, who's Professor of Theology at Villanova University in Philadelphia. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme at obviously such short notice and a very difficult time. What are your thoughts, what are your feelings at the moment, just half an hour after this announcement came into us?
My feeling is that an era is over, of course, but also the change of an era is over, as Pope Francis said many times, because Pope Francis, as the first Pope, not from Europe, not from Latin America, really opened the Catholic Church to its global dimension, which means changing everything we think, we assume about Catholicism on everything, on sexual morality, on international politics. He's really turned on its side many of the ways in which the institutional church, the Vatican, and the papacy looked at issues of women in the church, of war, of poverty, of international relations. He has really opened the Catholic Church to the third millennium in ways that are very, very different from his predecessors.
And presumably that created him an awful lot of friends, but also an awful lot of enemies within the Vatican and within the entire faithful Catholic community as well.
Sure, in the Vatican, but especially in some churches around the world, and specifically in the United States. His pontificate overlaps chronologically almost perfectly with the rise of Donald Trump and of that kind of political culture and of religious culture. The United States became the headquarters of the opposition to Pope Francis politically, intellectually, financially. And this moment of death of Pope Francis opens a very uncertain moment, because we have the rise of the Catholic culture, which is now in power, because, Francis met yesterday with the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, who's a neo-Catholic of that kind of sentiment, opens a very uncertain moment, because there has been a reaction against Pope Francis from the very first weeks. In the summer of 2013, even before Pope Francis started talking about almost anything, they captured essentially the challenge that having a Jesuit from Latin America criticizing capitalism, criticizing a certain bourgeois, middle class hypocrisy, which is typical of a certain Western Catholic culture. So it's been a pontificate of revelations of the underlying tensions between different continental cultures of Catholicism, what happened with Africa in these last couple of years on the issue of homosexuality. So this Pope has really revealed how complex Catholicism is, and he managed to keep it together, but without lying on what are the dividing issues right now.
So bearing in mind everything that you've said there, with all those difficult, different angles and ways of looking at it being pulled on the papacy, if you like, it's going to be very difficult, isn't it, for the church to find some kind of figure to replace him who can unify everyone together to bring all those different views and beliefs under one big umbrella.
Yes, it will be difficult for ecclesial reasons or theological reasons, because there are many different views on what to do with the role of women in the church, but also because this conclave will happen in these next 3, 4, 5 weeks in a very delicate international situation, which is more dangerous than any previous time since World War II. And so one of the questions will be what kind of pope this church needs to stop this world to go over to the abyss. And so there is not just the usual ecclesial church politics, but also there's a very high politics. But again, yesterday's meeting of Pope Francis with the Vice President of the United States came after months of tension with the United States of Donald Trump, which has seen always Pope Francis as an opponent on issues of immigration, of climate change, of international relations. And so this conclave will be a microcosm of how to keep this world together and not breaking apart in all possible different ways.
How does it affect an individual person, do you think, the death of the Pope? I mean, people who obviously follow the Catholic Church day in, day out, it's their life, it's their culture, it's their way of living, I suppose. I mean, it must be such a shock for those people, and trying to come to terms with it is a very difficult personal journey, I suppose.
It is, and it has become like that in these last 150 years for the mass media, but also because Pope Francis was a pope who intentionally wanted to bypass the institutional filters. He was a man of the people. He saw himself as a man of the people. His outreach was always directly to the people. and much more than the bishops or cardinals or the clergy. And so this will have an effect because he was really in direct contact with the faithful, but also with non-Catholics, I mean, around the world. And it's significant that yesterday he had his first show in St. Peter after 1 month and a half of absence because of his hospitalization, and then he died a few hours later, as if that last contact with the people was his goodbye. And so this will impact profoundly because Pope Francis made a point of reaching out to those who were considered incompatible with the church once, homosexuals, transgender, homeless people, non-normative types. And so that will be an impact that it's really hard or impossible to measure by any standards.
It's a huge moment, isn't it, that for the faithful, if you like, that they were able to see the Pope for one last time where he belongs, back in the Vatican yesterday. I mean, for the Church as well, that must, when they look back over what's happened in the future, that it's going to be a real sort of crowning moment, I suppose, to his papacy, and a real relief, I suppose, that he was able to do that before he passed away.
Right. So he belonged much more to the people than to the Vatican. He had a complex relationship with institutions in general, but especially with the Vatican as a machine, as the last European court of the Baroque era. So he was much closer to the people than to the elites of the Vatican bureaucracy and so on. And the moment yesterday was a crowning moment, as you said, yes, because that recapped how he opened his pontificate on March 13th, 2013, when he asked the blessing of the people in St. Peter over the new Bishop of Rome, something that was very unusual, and said something on how he understood his role. So they gave him his first benediction the day he was elected, and they gave him their last blessing yesterday. We didn't know that was going to be his last, but that yesterday in St. Peter on Easter Sunday was circling back to this very tight connection, very strong connection Pope Francis felt with the people and vice versa.
Good to talk to you on the programme. Thank you very much for joining us. Massimo Fagioni, Professor of Theology at Villanova University in Philadelphia. Thank you very much. A little bit more reaction just coming into us at France 24 on the death of the Pope, hearing from the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, hailing Pope Francis's commitment to the most vulnerable. That just coming into us also from the Polish President Duda on the Pope, saying he was a great apostle of mercy in whom he saw the answer to the challenges of the modern world. If you are just joining us here on France 24, we are bringing you coverage of the Pope. Announced about 45 minutes ago, 50 minutes ago now, that the Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88. Now, one of the great challenges that Pope Francis faced was dealing with the Catholic Church's history of abuses against vulnerable people. The hierarchy had long protected the predators in its ranks rather than the victims. Francis made the elimination of abuse a central mission of his papacy. Many survivors touched by his efforts to listen to and learn from their stories, but others say he didn't do enough to make up for the sins of the past or protect the victims in the present.
As Francis travelled the world during his papacy, he often made a point of seeking out people who had once been silenced in shame, survivors of sexual or institutional abuse at the hands of the Catholic Church.
I have seen him almost cry with the stories I tell him about letters that I bring him about people that have been abused. And he is a man of action, and he suffers.
In recent decades, the Church has been hit with revelation after revelation of widespread abuses, including the rape of children by paedophile priests and physical and sexual abuse in Catholic schools. Pope Francis spoke of his shame over those sins, apologising not just for the abuse itself, but also for the hierarchy's cover-ups and failures to act.
We ask for forgiveness for the times that, as a church, we have not treated the survivors of any type of abuse with compassion. Let's seek justice and truth with concrete actions.
Francis did try to take concrete action. In 2019, he introduced new laws on reporting abuse and reminded clerics of their duty to report to civil authorities, a huge change in dealing with crimes that had long been handled internally and shrouded in secrecy.
I make a heartfelt appeal for an all-out battle against child sexual abuse and other types of child abuse, because these are abominable crimes that must be wiped off the face of the earth.
In 2024, a commission on child abuse set up by Francis 10 years earlier published its first report. It said progress had been made in safeguarding children, but it warned there was still a culture of silence in some countries. The commission acknowledged that the Church had been in a dark period of abuse, but said a new era was beginning.
Accountability, care, and concern for victims is beginning to bring light to the darkness.
Many survivors are sceptical. They say despite Francis's efforts, the Catholic Church is still not doing enough to make reparations and to protect vulnerable people. They warn that hundreds of accused clergymen remain in positions that put them in contact with children at risk. And they say in some cases the Vatican continues to favour abusers over their victims. Pope Francis once said he wanted to confront abusers with the wrath of God, but survivors say they're still seeking justice on earth.
Siobhan Silk there with that report. Just finding some quotes for you. This is some of the words that Pope Francis uttered during coronavirus, addressing what was at the time a completely empty St. Peter's Square, saying we have realised that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disorientated. He went on at the time, back in 2020, to say all of us now need to row together, each of us in need of comforting the other. Those are the words of Pope Francis in 2028 as he addressed an empty St. Peter's Square during, of course, the coronavirus pandemic. Also getting a bit more reaction coming into us here at France 24 on the death of the Pope. Hearing, in fact, just in the last few moments from J.D. Vance saying he learnt of the passing of the Pope. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. Well, let's talk once again to our international affairs editor, Ketivan Gordestani, who's with us. Of course, we saw those images just yesterday, didn't we, of Ketivan, of J.D. Vance visiting the Pope. He's now landed in India on the next stage of his trip. But a bit of a controversial on-off meeting, wasn't it, between J.D. Vance and the Pope? In the end, it did happen, though.
Yes, it was a very brief meeting, and he actually goes on further in that statement on Twitter to say that he was very happy to see the Pope yesterday, though he was obviously very ill. But I think for J.D. Vance, who of course converted to Catholicism, it was very important for him to see the Pope. And J.D. Vance actually referencing what you were mentioning, which is the Pope speaking during COVID. He says, but I'll always remember him for the below homily he gave in the very early days of COVID. It was really quite beautiful. May God rest his soul. Going on to link to what the Pope had said during those very early days of COVID. So for J.D. Vance, this was both a personal meeting and a political meeting, because, of course, there has been quite some criticism, not recently, obviously, because the Pope was very sick and was not really commenting on anything, but more recently in the past months, and especially during the U.S. presidential campaign, there was quite a bit of controversy because the Pope was very open about his disagreements, especially when it came to the way the Trump administration talked about migrants, the way they talked about the poor, the way they talked about the people who were sort of cast aside. And there is really that line that I was talking about earlier, which was when the Pope, without mentioning Donald Trump, really questioned how this policy fit with Christian faith, saying that a person who only thinks about building walls, of course, Donald Trump, very famous for talking about building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, the Pope questioning whether that person is really a Christian, which really drew the fury of Donald Trump, who said that it was despicable that someone in that position would question somebody else's faith. But I think for J.D. Vance, it was also a way to sort of mend some of the ties, because obviously for the United States, even though not all the administration is Catholic, the fact of being criticized by one of the top Christians in the world was not a good look, especially when it came to the sort of religious base or religious wing of the Republican Party. And so it would have been interesting to figure out what J.D. Vance talked about with other officials from the Vatican, because the meeting with the Pope was a very brief meeting, mostly a personal meeting, a sort of photo op, if you will, for J.D. Vance to actually meet the Pope. But the political part, the policy part, happened the day before with the other Vatican officials.
Yeah, we were talking to our guest a short while ago from Villanova University in Philadelphia, a theologist who was making the point that, of course, the White House and J.D. Vance and those key figures now that have power in the U.S. are going to be following very intently who the next Pope is going to be. It's not their decision, of course, that decision made there in Rome, but with that swing to the right in the US, of course, it's very important to them who the Pope is and what their views are.
Absolutely. And I think that there is this idea of the Trump administration, or at least part of the Trump administration, being very focused on sort of religious nationalism in the United States, and bringing back really the Christian faith at the heart of the U.S. government. You have the fact that the Trump administration, or the Trump White House, created the Office of Faith within the White House to make faith be such a huge part of it. And of course, some of the main figures in the administration, we talked about J.D. Vance, but someone like Pete Hegseth is also someone who has been very forward with his faith, with his Christian faith, and insisting on how important that is, and a very traditional and conservative vision of faith and of his Christian faith. There is, of course, this whole controversy when it comes to some of the tattoos that reference sort of the Crusades and that side of the Christian faith, but they will likely be looking at who replaces Pope Francis to see if the Vatican goes with someone who is maybe going back a little bit on some of the more liberal policies and pushes that Pope Francis tried to put forward, not always succeeding, but that they might look at it as maybe reverting back to a sort of more conservative vision of religion, of Catholicism, and likely hoping that if that happens, if that is the case, there will be less criticism coming out of the Vatican, because you have to see it as more than just something about Catholics per se, but really sort of moral voice in the world, that doesn't look very good when you are being, questioned in your faith, for example, by the Pope, because the way you talk about migrants, about the poor people, is something that doesn't really align with sort of the wording of the faith. And that is something that for this administration very particularly, because they put religion so much forward, is going to be very interesting to see.
More reaction coming into us here at France 24. This coming in from the Irish Prime Minister a few moments ago, saying that Pope Francis spoke out for the poor and the oppressed. A great man has left us as well. This now quote from Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, saying a great man has left us. Those quotes just coming into us here at France 24 as world leaders continue to react to the death of the Pope. And Pope Francis was, of course, nicknamed the Pope of the Poor, inspired by the Jesuit vision of poverty and the movement of priests in the shanty towns. He regularly visited poor districts of the capital and the rest of the country as well before his election to evangelize, to help with social work and to listen as well, to explore his legacy amongst the most vulnerable. We've been to one of the areas where he was often visited before he became Pope and where he celebrated many masses. Let's find out more then in this report.
Shantytown 2124 in the south of the Argentinian capital is one of those that Father Bergoglio regularly visited before becoming Pope Francis. Many of the local people have fond memories of a simple, good man who was close to them. Rita was one of the missionaries who accompanied him.
The Pope sat at this table. He often came here to eat.
Then Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he refused to be called Monsignor.
People would sometimes ask him, "Father, why are you coming here? Why don't you go uptown? You'd be better off there." And he would reply, "I like it here. I'd rather be here with you than in the cathedral."
The parish here is very active, faithful to the teachings of the movement of priests from the shanty towns, which advocates community work. In one of the soup kitchens in the district, which depends on the parish, the women who prepare around 100 meals a day feel that Bergoglio has touched their lives. Betty named her son Francis in his honor.
I feel proud because here we are poor Argentines, and he was one of us, just like us, but a pope.
A representative for all those who live hard lives, often forgotten by the rest of society. Father Toto de Bedia, who runs the local parish, has worked with Bergoglio since his early days and was one of his close friends in Buenos Aires.
He was an austere man. When he said, "I want a poor church for the poor," he didn't say it out of nowhere. He comes from this humble church which is close to the poorest people, just as Jesus was.
During his pontificate, Pope Francis worked towards helping and valuing the labor of the shantytown priests. Even though he has never returned to Argentina, everyone here is convinced that he has never forgotten them.
Report for you here on France 24. We're also getting now that official reaction then from the French President Emmanuel Macron. Let's hear what he had to say.
During his time as Pope, he stood by the most vulnerable, the most fragile, with great humility and a very special sense of the other and of the most fragile. In these times of war and brutality, he was faithful to a tradition that was dear to him. It was the vocation of a man, a bishop, then a cardinal and a pope, who throughout his life fought for greater justice, who fought for certain ideas of humanity, that is to say, an idea of brotherhood that I believe many people identify with.
Yeah, the reaction there of Emmanuel Macron just coming into us. Emmanuel Macron actually arriving on the French Indian Ocean island of Mayotte in the last few hours. He's doing a trip around that region of the world at the moment. Of course, Mayotte recovering from that huge cyclone that hit it just 4 months ago. So Emmanuel Macron landing there in Mayotte and just finding out a couple of hours later about the death of the Pope that we're continuing, of course, to cover here on France 24. You can see all those images. They're coming into us from St. Peter's Square. Ketevan Gordestani is with me. Of course, it's that word legacy, isn't it, that everyone's going to be talking about now, the legacy of the Pope, what he meant to people, to the faithful, even to people who, were not necessarily Catholics themselves, but obviously were still affected and listened to his words.
Yeah, and I think for those who don't have the sort of religious attachment to the Pope, what he will be remembered for is really his fight for the poor and especially for migrants. And you have to go back to sort of the very beginning of his time as Pope when he went in 2013 to the Italian island of Lampedusa. At the time, it wasn't really as known as it is now as a sort of a flashpoint of the migration issue in the Mediterranean. And he went there and he had these words that really sort of was calling and really pointing the finger at the rest of the world for a sort of desensitizing of what was happening to people around the world, to those migrants. And I'll just mention some of the words he said. He blasted a culture of comfort, which makes us think only of ourselves, makes us insensitive to the cries of other people. So really talking as sort of about the selfishness of this modern world. Then he added, in this globalized world, we have fallen into globalized indifference. We have become used to the suffering of others, saying, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't concern me, it's none of my business. So I think that was one of his main fights. This was very, very early on, just a couple of months after he became Pope. And this is something that he continued throughout his time until his death, really, as long as his health allowed him to talk about these things. Really, migration, the plight of the poor was something that he focused on. Also, the plight of just simply the marginalized in any shape or form. You had a Pope who, for example, went very often to prisons to pray for the prisoners. He actually did this just a couple of days ago during this Easter weekend. So this was something that he really focused on. He didn't want to be remembered as the sort of the Pope that was stuck in the Vatican and only there for these big masses, and that he was the Pope of the people, that he was someone who was easily in contact with the people outside of the sort of pomp and circumstance of the Vatican. And earlier on, when his health permitted, he was a Pope also who traveled a lot abroad, especially in Latin America, of course, because he was the first Latin American Pope. And that for the Western Hemisphere, and especially for Latin America, was something that really mattered to them, the sort of seeing someone coming from their region to be the leader of the Catholic world.
Ketevan, thanks very much. Ketevan Gordestani, International Affairs Editor here on France 24. Let's bring up once again, full screen if we can, those images that we've been showing you of St. Peter's Square, of course, in the Vatican. You can see on those images people starting to throng to St. Peter's Square, coming to the main square there to pay their respects just a day after. You can see a lot of the square still set up after that Easter service, of course, that the Pope was at just 24 hours ago. It is now just after 11 o'clock here here in Paris, same time, of course, as it is at the Vatican, there in the heart of Rome, as people start to gather to pay their respects after the news that Pope Francis, the first Latin American leader of the Roman Catholic Church, has died. The Vatican saying in a video statement he was 88. He had, of course, been suffering various ailments in his 12-year papacy and only just released from hospital after that stay that he spent there, having been rather ill, shall we say, over the last few months, of course. Well, look, going to continue to follow that story for you here on France 24. But first of all, let's look back then at his life.
The white smoke spiraling from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel made Jorge Maria Bergoglio the first non-European pope in 1300 years. Born in Argentina in 1936 to Italian immigrant parents, he grew up in a modest family in Buenos Aires. During his studies, Jorge Bergoglio worked as a janitor and a nightclub bouncer, an unusual profile, but one that didn't prevent him from climbing the ladder within the church. He was appointed bishop, then archbishop, before being appointed as Cardinal of Buenos Aires in 2001. Nicknamed Prince of the Poor, he made clear he wouldn't live in the Vatican like his predecessors, instead choosing to reside at St. Martha's Guest House with other clergy members.
I was wondering, why did you give up all the wealth of a pope?
I have a need to live among the people.
For his first visit outside Rome, the pontiff chose the Italian island of Lampedusa, where thousands of migrants died attempting to reach its shores. Pope Francis also spoke out for societal stances like homosexuality.
If a person is gay and willingly seeks the Lord, who am I to judge?
Whilst it was a change in message, it wasn't a change in doctrine, as the Vatican reaffirmed that homosexuality is a sin. Pope Francis's statements have been controversial within the Catholic Church, who have tried to maintain unity within it. In February 2019, the Pope held an unprecedented international summit, where he said that the Church was ready to take responsibility for abuse against children.
The Church will do whatever is necessary to bring to justice anyone who has committed such crimes.
Pope Francis also emphasized a more inclusive Catholic Church, but this earned him criticism of conservatives who accused him of diluting the Church's teachings. And a stinging criticism of the Curia, the Church's central government, meant many in the Vatican have long wanted to see him go. After an exhausting journey to Canada in July, he hinted he might follow the unusual example set by his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, and resign from the role.
This, with all honesty, is not a catastrophe. There can be a change of popes.
For his critics, Francis did not behave like a pope should. But his supporters will remember him for his simplicity, vibrant personality, and his empathy for the poor.
Jenny Shin there looking back at the life of the Pope. Let's hear now the official announcement, shall we, from the Vatican, making that announcement that the Pope did pass away at around 7:35 local time there.
Dear brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow, I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and His Church.
At the official announcement from the Vatican of the death of the Pope at around 7:35 this morning. A little bit more reaction coming into you once again. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi saying that Pope Francis was a beacon of compassion, and we had that reaction as well from J.D. Vance a short while ago. And of course the two men together now, because J.D. Vance, after his meeting with the Pope, has gone on to India, where the two men are due to spend the next few days discussing trade deals. Ketevan Gorgistani, International Affairs editors, with me. Ketevan, it's going to cast, obviously, a big shadow, isn't it, over that meeting that's going on between J.D. Vance and Narendra Modi, but at the same time, presumably, they will get down to the business side of it as well.
Yes, and I think it will be a bigger issue, obviously, for J.D. Vance, who it just came from seeing the Pope. He was the last official to have a meeting with the Pope before the Pope passed away. He has probably one of the final pictures of the Pope that will be remembered. And, of course, J.D. Vance himself is a Catholic, so it was a very important moment for him. He obviously did not expect that less than 24 hours later, the Pope would no longer be in this world. And so obviously for J.D. Vance, it will be an odd moment because there are a lot of political issues and trade wars and very down-to-earth matters to discuss with Modi during this trip. But this today likely will have a sort of a personal aspect to it. And of course, J.D. Vance, who put out a statement on Twitter about the passing of the Pope and remembering, of course, the meeting he had with the Pope, but also referencing that long speech that the Pope made at the start of the COVID pandemic, which is something that, of course, a lot of people remember. But so for the U.S. Vice President, it is likely going to be a personal day, even though, as you mentioned, he is going to be meeting with Narendra Modi later on tonight. We don't have any word of whether there is any change in the schedule, perhaps, for the vice president so far, but maybe that could be something that will happen, some delays in the official, very political schedule in India.
A little bit more reaction coming into it. This is the first reaction I've seen from Africa. The Ethiopian Prime Minister praising the Pope's Francis's legacy of compassion, and also some reaction coming in from the Russian Orthodox Church. The Moscow Patriarch saying Pope Francis developed contacts and praising him for doing that with the Russian Orthodox Church. Ketavan, you were talking a little while ago and saying that one of the things that Pope Francis was very much criticised for at one stage anyway was for his reaction, and particularly his initial reactions to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Absolutely, because there was a moment at the beginning where his reaction was, if you look back at the positions of the Pope and of this Pope, whenever he was discussing a conflict, there was always this idea and this desire of backing away and rejecting all forms of war. But the way it translated in what he said about the Ukraine-Russia war seemed to, at least in the eyes of Ukrainians and of supporters of Ukraine, being to both sides, if you will, putting Ukraine and Russia too much on the same level. He initially, when the war broke out, wanted to go to Moscow, sort of as a mediator, as a political mediator, to try to talk to Vladimir Putin, to try to prevent this war from really blowing up. He, at the time, said something along the lines that the war between Ukraine and Russia should not be seen as a cowboy movie with the good guys on one side and the bad guys on the other. And of course, for those who believe, not the Russians, but for those who believe that Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine the victim, this idea that there are no good guys or bad guys in this case was heavily criticized. He also at some point talked about Ukraine maybe having to raise a white flag, so give up, capitulate. These were things that came for the Pope from an idea of anti-war and of avoiding conflict, but translated in this context as something that was really equating the situation between Russia and Ukraine without taking sides. And so over time, he sort of changed the positions that he had. But we saw this sort of criticism and contradiction a little bit in several conflicts throughout his time as Pope. For example, when he went to Myanmar and he met with the Rohingyas, and he met with the junta, he met with Aung San Suu Kyi, and he there again was criticized a little bit for not wanting to sort of take sides and for not going after, for example, the junta for their treatment, for not using certain words. So this is something that was not new, but it's true that it came back in the early months of the war in Ukraine, which also coincided to the start of seeing the Pope less and less as his health was degrading. And of course, in recent months, we haven't heard as much from him as we would have had he been in good health.
Well, let's bring in my guest now on the programme. Mark Roscoe-Lutho is a freelance journalist and a cultural anthropologist in Budapest. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme today. What are your first initial reactions and thoughts on hearing the death of Pope Francis?
Well, it really is the loss of a visionary global leader, and I'm sure that the world's Catholics, as well as the entire Christian community all over the world, is mourning the loss of this man who really brought a sense of compassion, a sense of pastoral commitment to the papacy in a way that had not been seen for generations and generations.
I mean, it is one of those world historic moments, isn't it? We've just been hearing, in fact, in the last few moments, that Notre Dame here in Paris has been ringing out its bells, of course, in honour of the Pope.
As really, it is, I think, the most appropriate response, not only to ring out the bells, but really to say prayers of gratitude for his leadership through in a number of issues that really affect the world as a whole. He really, from the beginning of his papacy, portrayed himself as coming from the ends of the earth and representing the ends of the earth, all the marginalized peoples of the world, not just in the Catholic Church, but throughout the world. He really saw himself as a champion of all those who are marginalized and all those who are oppressed.
How do you think he will be remembered then?
But I think he will really be remembered as someone who tried to bring the church into the most pressing global concerns, into conversation about the most pressing global concerns that will really kind of live beyond that will continue to impact future generations and live beyond his particular papacy, his particular time in office. And I'm thinking here of the global environmental catastrophe, the concerns of migration and refugees throughout the world. And then, of course, he was, very clearly involved, as your previous commentator observed, in trying to end aggression against Ukraine and trying to see a way towards peace throughout the world.
What did he mean to people who loved him and supported him and loved the way that he tried to modernize the church?
Thanks. For people who really felt like Pope Francis represented them and who really thrilled to the new style and the new approach that he brought to the papacy, he really brought a very human-centered attitude to everything that he did, from the most central rituals of the papacy in Rome, presiding over the liturgical events, calendrical liturgical events of the year, to kind of extraordinary gestures like traveling to, for instance, Mongolia and traveling to some of the most neglected and forgotten corners of the church. He really brought a human-centered, very humble attitude to everything he did. And I'm thinking here of some of the first gestures that he made during during his time in office, for instance, traveling to Lampedusa to meet personally with refugees and to bring them back on his papal plane. Really, that was a striking gesture of being one of the people, being with the people, that many of his supporters thrilled to.
He certainly had his critics, though, didn't he, particularly from the right wing in society?
So at the beginning of his papacy, he really tried to bring together the right and the left in the church. And perhaps this is one of the ways in which his papacy can be seen as at least having a mixed record, if not an outright failure. He really tried to be the Pope of all Catholics, the Pope of both the right and the left. And he expressed a deep pastoral concern for those who objected to some of the ways in which he tried to modernize the church. He tried to stay engaged in conversation with them. And in the end, they were not willing to accompany him. They were not willing to stay in conversation with him. And he sort of kind of let them go with, I think, a sense of sadness and perhaps even a sense of frustration.
So how does the church now go about finding itself a new leader and someone that can unite all those sides together under the big umbrella of the Catholic Church?
That is the question, and it is really unclear to, I think, most church observers, whether they're deep on the inside or kind of outside observers to the whole process. It really is unclear how a new pope is going to try to unite the church in a way that Pope Francis was really unable to do. There are lots of whispers about who could be the next cardinal, or rather who could be the next pope from amongst the College of Cardinals, those who are second in line. And it's really unclear exactly who is going to become the leader of the Universal Church. There are many possible candidates. Much speculation about where the next pope would come from, whether it would come from the African continent, from the Americas, or from Southeast Asia, where the church is growing the fastest. It really is going to be a remarkable set of events coming in Rome for the next conclave.
Good to have you with us on the programme today. Thank you very much, Mark Roscoe-Lutho, freelance journalist and cultural anthropologist, joining us there live from Budapest. Well, our correspondent in Rome thank you very much. Our correspondent in Rome, Seema Gupta, has rushed to St. Peter's Square to join us now live from there. Seema, just as I gather you're up on a balcony there overlooking St. Peter's Square, give us a bit of a sense of the atmosphere, can you, and what it's like being there on this historic moment.
I think it's just an incredible feeling of shock. It was shock when I heard it. It's shock when you hear it mentioned to other people. That's simply because we saw him on Easter Sunday out there in the balcony. Yes, his voice sounded weak. Yes, he did sounded like he had a little bit of problem speaking, but he seemed like he wanted to be there. He seemed determined, as he always has been. This is a pope who is known to be quite stubborn, who was known to be quite stubborn in terms of wanting to get close to the faithful, and that's what he did. He got on that open-top Pope mobile, drove through the square, down Via Conciliazione, and then back down again. Now the word is just coming out. Romans, the millions and thousands of tourists, of course, that are here in Rome, let's not forget, it's the Jubilee year. It's the holy year in the Catholic calendar. So you've got an additional number of people here. So the word coming out, it's spreading. Some people are rushing to get to St. Peter's Square, wanting to feel that they're closer to the Pope. Others said to me, well, you know, perhaps he overdid it on Easter Sunday. Maybe he shouldn't have done something like that. I have to admit, seeing him in the square, seeing him on that Pope mobile, it filled me with emotion, but it also made me wonder, was this really the right thing to do, considering he was out in the open? It was a beautiful spring day yesterday, like it is today. The weather was good, but clearly he felt strong enough, and clearly it was important for him to be close to the faithful. But news just trickling in now here in Rome. Romans used to this process. They know what's involved, but Pope Francis was a very particular pope. The last 12 years, we've seen lots of changes, new things in the papacy here at the Vatican. And so clearly there's a lot of emotions right now here in Rome, in the capital, and at the Vatican, of course.
Yeah, Roman's used to it. You're used to it as well, Seema. You've covered these handovers several times for us here at France 24. Just give us a bit of an indication about what we might expect to see just over the next couple of days, you know, before the process gets underway to find a new pope. What may we see, and what kind of emotions do you think are going to be felt there in Rome?
Well, if it's anything to compare with, I was here when Pope John Paul II passed, and I saw the outpouring of emotion at the square, the people coming there in shock, in grief. And he had suffered for a very long period. He was known to be ailing for a very long period before he passed. In this case, we saw those 5 weeks that Pope Francis spent at Rome Gemelli's Hospital. We saw the outpouring at the hospital, at the Vatican. People were concerned about his health. Many, I have to say, said to me, maybe he's actually passed already. We don't know. We haven't seen him. For 5 weeks, we didn't have a clear look of him. We heard his voice. There was an audio message released. So at that time, a lot of concern, but a lot of joy when he appeared yesterday. Now, of course, is the whole process of dealing with the body of the Pope, the prayer, the vigils, the various services that will be held, and, of course, the funeral mass, which will be held at St. Peter's Square. We're waiting to hear from the Vatican on the details of this, of course, but the news just broke, and so it's overwhelming for overwhelming for those who are very close to the Pontiff, who have been helping him in this period of convalescence, the doctors, the therapists, his nurse, and the people who help him in the Casa Santa Marta. Pope Francis chose to stay in the residence and not in the papal apartment. He chose to stay there because, as we know, Pope Francis always wanted to be closer to the faithful, and that allowed him to be closer to the faithful. And now the faithful have to deal with the news of his death. Once there is a funeral, we understand Pope Francis particularly had indicated that he did not want to be buried at St. Peter's Basilica, but at St. Mary the Major, Santa Maria Maggiore, as it's known here in Rome. Basilica, one of the 4 main basilicas of Rome. It was a basilica that was very important to him. If you recall, right after he was discharged from hospital, he went straight there because there is an icon of Mary there that he's very close to. It was where he would visit before and after every papal visit to a different country. He often went there, and that was his request. So we'll see how the funeral plans will be worked out. And then, of course, after that, as I already mentioned earlier, there will be a period where they will allow all the cardinals to come to Rome, to be present, and then starts the whole procedure of the conclave.
Yeah, and of course, not just there at the Vatican and in Rome, but right across the world, Seema, reacting to this. Just to give you a couple more reactions, the Lebanese president mourning the loss of the country's dear friend, Pope Francis. Germany's Olaf Scholz hailing Pope Francis as a man of reconciliation. Just hearing the first reaction as well coming into us from the White House, saying very simply, rest in peace after the Pope's death. I mean, it is one of those worldwide events. I mean, I'm thinking perhaps the death of the Queen, for example, was a similar event over the last few years that really brings together the whole planet to follow events and to remember and look back and reflect over the last few years.
Yes, definitely. I mean, he was the leader of 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, and he traveled, he visited all the continents. He made a trip, in fact, last year, a very intense trip that lasted 12 days, to Southeast Asia. That was his view. I want to reach out to these maybe not as popular places, the more forgotten places, the smaller places, often in countries where the Catholic community wasn't exactly very large. He traveled to Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country. He made it a point to reach out to those groups. So we're going to see the reaction from those different groups, his native Argentina, and of course here in Europe. But he did reach out to all the continents in the world, and clearly we're going to be hearing from them. And let's not forget, even when he does have the funeral, like it was in the case of the funeral of John Paul II, you had world leaders traveling from everywhere, wanting to be present, wanting to express their condolences, their sorrow. But for the moment, I think it's just the city of Rome waking up, to this on an Easter Monday. It's a public holiday here. People are waking up to this information, trying to grapple and understand it, and putting it in contrast to those images that we saw on Sunday with a Pope going through the crowds, clearly happy to bless those little babies. And of course, we even saw him meet other world leaders. He did meet the Vice President of the United States, a brief meeting just to exchange Easter greetings, but it did happen just on Sunday. And now, of course, word coming in from world leaders all around the globe.
Sima, I'll let you go in just a moment, but let me ask you just one final question. We talked about what happens in the short term there at the Vatican. Let's talk a little bit more longer term. I mean, at what stage are we likely to, is that conclave likely to start sitting, and what point may we hear about who the new Pope might be?
Well, we'll have to see how the Vatican plays it out in terms of the calendar. At the moment, obviously, the focus will be on the funeral services, the prayer services, the vigils as people gather here in Rome. A lot of the faithful, a lot of the clergy, a lot of nuns may want to be closer to the Vatican if they can. And so after the funeral, after all of that, we'll then hear from whoever's in charge now in the Vatican, the Camerlengo. We'll hear from them, and they'll be able to tell us exactly the timetable of when, giving time for the cardinals to come here to Rome. They will probably travel for the funeral, but they may stay on. And then their residents, they will, in the past, the Casa Santa Marta was actually built for that purpose, to house the cardinals before they meet and are locked in the Sistine Chapel in order to carry out the vote process. So they will stay there. That's their residence. They will have no access to their phones, to any information, newspapers. They are supposed to concentrate, pray, and then eventually vote for a successor to Pope Francis, the next Pope. We'll have to see what happens. It's a very new group in terms of the College of Cardinals that will be voting. Many of them have been put in that position by Pope Francis himself. And so there's a whole new group of people in there. Are they going to, obviously the speculation now starts, is it going to be a more conservative candidate? Is it going to be progressive in the lines of what Pope Francis himself was on certain issues? Pope Francis wasn't very conservative when it came to core Catholic teachings such as abortion, celibacy in the priesthood, and human rights. Those kinds of issues, he was still very strong in terms of Catholic teaching. So is it going to be a continuation of his, or somebody new, maybe somebody who is more conservative? Obviously, there's going to be lots of talk about that and lots of prayer on the part of the cardinals themselves, and only then will we know. But the actual timetable, it could be a few weeks, it could be up to a month. It depends on how it's done. In the past, of course, it took forever for the cardinals to travel here to Rome. Things might be a little bit different now, and so there might be a shorter period. But we'll have to see what the Vatican tells us. For the moment, they've informed us that he did pass at 7:35 this morning, and he was someone who dedicated his life to the church in service to the faithful, and always focusing on the marginalized, the vulnerable. That was always his message right from day one.
Sima, thanks very much. Sima Gupta there, our correspondent, joining us there live from Rome, as we can continue to watch those images of people beginning to gather. More and more people flocking there, as we can see, to St. Peter's Square. We saw a short while ago crowds of people flocking to get into the square there as well. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier on the programme, of course, perhaps the last big world leader, if you like, to meet with Pope Francis was J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, who has now made his way to India, due to be in India for, if I remember off the top of my head, I think it's a 4 or 5 day visit to India to talk about economic links between the US and India. And I'm joined now on the programme by Priyata Brajaspi, who joins us, our correspondent, joining us from New Delhi. Priyata, presumably the agenda likely to be rather changed now with the news that we've got coming out from the Vatican as to what exactly J.D. Vance is going to be doing and saying there in India.
Absolutely. It is a very surreal change of events here. Of course, the media was focusing on this all-important meeting between U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But of course, the focus has shifted because, like you rightly mentioned, Mr. Vance was the last leader to have met Pope Francis. Only yesterday, it was a short meeting, but it from Vatican City he headed towards India. And in fact, he has also tweeted and he said, I'm just going to read it out. He said, just learned the passing of Pope Francis. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. I was happy to see him only yesterday, though he was obviously very ill, but I'll always remember him for his homily he gave in the very early days of COVID. Now, a lot of reactions coming in from India as well. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also expressed his condolences. He has said, I'm deeply pained by the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis in the hour of grief and remembrance. My heartfelt condolences to the global Catholic community. He also said that he fondly recalls meeting Pope Francis. He, in fact, met him last year in June in Italy on the sidelines of the G7 summit. And Mr. Modi has also tweeted some pictures that he had with Pope Francis. Now, India's ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is a right-wing Hindu majoritarian party, has also tweeted, and they've called Pope Francis an iconic leader, and the entire Christian community, specifically the Catholic community in India, is also mourning the news of death of Pope Francis. They are mourning his death and are, in fact, have said that they are deeply, deeply pained by this news. It is very interesting because there was news that Pope Francis was supposed to visit India sometime later this year or early next year, but unfortunately, that will not come to pass.
Priyanta, thanks very much. Priyanta Bajabasi joining us there from New Delhi. Thank you. A little bit more reaction or response to the reaction, I suppose, here in France. We're hearing the Eiffel Tower is to go dark tonight as well after the death of Pope Francis. We were hearing a little bit earlier on about Notre Dame ringing out their bells 88 times for 88 years of the life of the Pope as well. Well, we're going to cross now to our correspondent, Noga Polski. She's joining us from the Patriarch of Jerusalem there. Noga, bring us the reaction from there, can you? What's the sense of people there, of faithful, of course, Jerusalem, very much a city divided, if you like, by lots of different religions, including, of course, Christianity.
Yes, and it's the birthplace of Catholicism here between Jerusalem and Nazareth and Bethlehem. The reactions here have been very quick. The president of Israel, almost immediately, as soon as we heard the news, issued a message of deep condolence. I think it's important to remember the importance of Jerusalem for Pope Francis, who, during his time as the Cardinal of Buenos Aires, was really renowned for his ecumenical outreach, for even books he wrote together with local Jewish and Muslim leadership in Argentina, and whose first trip as Pope 10 years ago, his first pilgrimage, was to the city of Jerusalem, where he held a summit of church leaders from the Eastern and the Western. I apologize for the noise. The old city of Jerusalem is a bustling, noisy place. He held a summit here 10 years ago in which he referred to the importance of Jerusalem as the mother church. And Pope Francis, similarly, he elevated Pier Battista Pizzaballa to become the first cardinal of Jerusalem in September of 2023, on the 30th of September. So he really gave supreme importance to the centrality of Jerusalem in Catholic theology, and he hoped to increase the importance of the church in the Middle East and of the city of Jerusalem in the Catholic world.
Noga, thanks very much. Noga Polski, our correspondent, joining us there live from Jerusalem. Well, Pope Francis was, of course, nicknamed the Pope of the Poor. Inspired by the Jesuit vision of poverty and the movement of priests in the shanty towns, he regularly visited poor districts of the capital and the rest of the country as well before his election to evangelise and to help with social work and to listen as well. To explore his legacy amongst the most vulnerable, we have been to one of the areas where he often visited before becoming Pope and where he celebrated many masses. Let's find out more then in this report.
Shantytown 2124 in the south of the Argentinian capital is one of those that Father Bergoglio regularly visited before becoming Pope Francis. Many of the local people have fond memories of a simple, good man who was close to them. Rita was one of the missionaries who accompanied him.
The Pope sat at this table. He often came here to eat.
Then Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he refused to be called Monsignor.
People would sometimes ask him, "Father, why are you coming here? Why don't you go uptown? You'd be better off there." And he would reply, "I like it here. I'd rather be here with you than in the cathedral."
The parish here is very active, faithful to the teachings of the movement of priests from the shanty towns, which advocates community work. In one of the soup kitchens in the district, which depends on the parish, the women who prepare around 100 meals a day feel that Bergoglio has touched their lives. Betty named her son Francis in his honor.
I feel proud because here we are poor Argentines, and he was one of us, just like us, but a pope.
A representative for all those who live hard lives, often forgotten by the rest of society. Father Toto de Bedia, who runs the local parish, has worked with Bergoglio since his early days and was one of his close friends in Buenos Aires.
He was an austere man. When he said, "I want a poor church for the poor," he didn't say it out of nowhere. He comes from this humble church which is close to the poorest people, just as Jesus was.
During his pontificate, Pope Francis worked towards helping and valuing the labor of the shantytown priests. Even though he has never returned to Argentina, everyone here is convinced that he has never forgotten them.
Yeah, a special report for you there here on France 24. Ketvan Gordistani, our International Affairs Editor, is with me once again. Ketvan, we've been talking a lot, haven't we, about some of those really big issues that the Pope really took to his heart and spoke to and really pushed on. One of them, or perhaps the biggest one, has definitely been the cause of the migrants. Something, of course, which has rubbed him very much up the wrong way with certain people around the world, particularly nowadays in the US.
Yes, there was a general sense that he believed that protecting migrants was, as he called it, quote, the duty of civilization. So he was a big critic of anti-immigration policies around the world. But you're right, this did sort of come to head with the Trump administration. It started, obviously, during the campaign when Pope Francis talked about, without naming Donald Trump, talked about this idea of building walls on the border and saying that a person who only thinks about building walls wherever they may be is not a Christian, which of course rubbed Donald Trump the wrong way, who responded by saying that it was despicable to question someone's faith. But this really sort of gained steam as Donald Trump returned to the White House and really laid out his immigration policy and this idea of mass deportations to get rid of millions and millions, as he said, of illegal immigrants in the United States. And one of the sort of flashpoints really came when J.D. Vance, the vice president, sort of used a Christian concept, the concept of ordo amoris, to justify Donald Trump's deportation policies. And that concept is sort of very simply put the idea that there is a hierarchy when it comes to your duties to protect different levels of community. So you start with your family, then you go to community, and it gets more and more distant. And so J.D. Vance used that to sort of justify that they needed to treat migrants differently to protect their own. So putting the needs of the American people above those of those migrants. And this is something that the Pope did not let pass by. This was, of course, before his health really declined. It was around February, and it was before he entered the hospital. And he wrote an open letter. It was to the sort of the American Catholic leadership, but it was in a way very much directed at the Trump administration. And he basically responded by saying that J.D. Vance was using this concept in the wrong way, and that he said, quote, "The true Ordo Amoris that must be promoted is the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception." He also said that deporting people who come from difficult situations violates the dignity of many men and women and of entire families. So it was a very direct criticism of the Trump administration. And of course, J.D. Vance's visit to the Vatican over this Easter weekend was a way for J.D. Vance, who has converted to Catholicism, to sort of mend a little bit their relationship. He obviously had that very brief meeting with Pope Francis, who was still at that time, and J.D. Vance said it in his statement that the Pope was very ill, so it's unlikely that they directly had a conversation about that. But before that, the day before, J.D. Vance met with several officials, high-ranking officials from the Vatican, which was described by both sides as an exchange of opinions when it comes to different elements of policy. Obviously, immigration likely to